You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
With new McValue at McDonald's, you always get more than you expect every day. So even if gas prices go up, you can buy a double cheeseburger and add a McChicken for $1. Or before game time, you can get $5 meal deals for the group. And if breakfast is about to end, get deals in the app to save before the bell. The choice is yours, and the choice with McValue is always more.
Prices and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value. Must opt into rewards for app deals.
Auto insurance can all seem the same until it comes time to use it. So don't get stuck paying more for less coverage. Switch to USAA Auto Insurance and you could start saving money in no time. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply. USAA.
By storing all of this data, you are a honeypot. You're a honeypot that is actually attracting unwanted attention to your enterprise and bringing cyber criminals to attack it. And cyber criminals are no longer one guy or two guys sitting in a basement trying to attack the system, right? These are well-funded, thousands of employees employed, nation-state data centers and IT firms that are trying to do cyber criminal activity against one country to another country.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K CyberWire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Health and Homeland Security. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben and I look at some of the early actions of the Trump administration and what they portend for the future. And later in the show, my conversation with Shiva Nathan, founder and CEO of Anonymous, talking about the challenges of data privacy. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. Hey everybody, Dave here. Have you ever wondered where your personal information is lurking online? Like many of you, I was concerned about my data being sold by data brokers. So I decided to try Delete Me. I have to say, Delete Me is a game changer. Within days of signing up, they started removing my personal information from hundreds of data brokers. I finally have peace of mind knowing my data privacy is protected. Delete Me's team does all the work for you with detailed reports, so you know exactly what's been done. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and use promo code N2K at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/N2K and enter code N2K at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/N2K, code N2K. All right, Ben. So as you and I are recording this, it is, 26 hours or so after...
Only 1,400 or whatever days to go. I don't know how many hours that is. So somebody will do the math.
President Trump was sworn in. We're recording this on Tuesday. So President Trump was sworn in yesterday on Monday. And he got right to work with a whole avalanche of executive orders, which is, you have pointed out to me, is pretty par for the course in terms of a new president coming in and taking over and reversing a lot of the executive orders of the prior president.
Right. They want to feel like they're doing something, and you can't just pass laws on your first day, although Congress can tee up some bills for you.
Yeah.
This is the way to do it, through executive orders.
All right. Well, let's start off with, I think, something that's been certainly capturing a lot of people's imagination and the media, and that's the TikTok ban. I think we find ourselves in an interesting place here with TikTok. What President Trump has said he's going to do and how that might bump up against the limits of what he's actually able to do. So where are we, Ben?
So just to give some quick background, I know we've talked about this a lot. Congress passed a law last year. It was supported by a majority of members of both parties in the House and the Senate. It required TikTok to divest from its parent company, ByteDance, lest it be banned in the United States. So the drop-dead date was going to be January 19th, the day before President Trump was sworn in. They picked that date on purpose. If TikTok had not been sold to a U.S. entity, then it would be banned in the U.S. There was some dispute as to what that actually meant. Like, was it just banned from app stores, or were they going to go into your devices and prevent you from using it, which it turns out TikTok did shut itself down prior to that deadline. The only way that deadline could have been extended is if the president made some sort of statement through an executive order saying, we are close enough to a deal for divestment. Here's the evidence of divestment. Here's the potential buyer that we're putting a pause on this for 90 days. And the president was granted authority to do that in this law that passed. So this was challenged through our court system. The D.C. Circuit upheld the ban on TikTok. It was challenged on First Amendment grounds. So it went up to the United States Supreme Court. They considered the case on an expedited basis because obviously we needed a decision prior to that January 19th deadline. So the Supreme Court heard the case. And late last week, in an unsigned but unanimous decision, the Supreme Court upheld the ban. So there were a couple of First Amendment challenges. One was from TikTok itself, saying that they had First Amendment rights in some of their own content. The use of their algorithm is a form of expression or speech. That was one of the things they argued. And then separately, joining the suit were a bunch of TikTok users, influencers, who used TikTok as their mode of expression. And they asserted in this case that the government's policy was violating their First Amendment rights.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, the Supreme Court said a foreign entity does not have First Amendment rights. That's very important. And even granting that TikTok itself is a U.S. company, if you're not including ByteDance, this law is still constitutionally acceptable. If you are considering this under what's called intermediate scrutiny, because this is a content-neutral restriction on speech, then the government certainly has an important interest here in preventing ByteDance, which allegedly is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Chinese government, from collecting data on U.S. persons and through allegedly manipulating the algorithm to influence what our young people in the United States are seeing on their timelines. So certainly you have an important governmental interest there, and the means of achieving that interest are substantially related to that interest. There was a dispute as to whether strict scrutiny should apply, which it would have to if this was a content-based restriction on speech. So if we were restricting only a particular type of content, only a particular type of speech, then strict scrutiny would apply. This was a completely novel case, so it wasn't entirely clear which level of scrutiny applies. If you read the Supreme Court decision, they seem to say, we think intermediate scrutiny should apply here because this is content neutral. We're banning every single TikTok video, whether it's from an influencer or whether it's from the Chinese government itself. It's all banned. So they think that the only intermediate scrutiny should apply. But they also said if strict scrutiny applies, they probably still would have upheld the statute anyway. The rationale is that Congress put together a very compelling record of the Chinese government's actions vis-a-vis the parent company ByteDance, that they really are manipulating algorithms. They really are collecting data on U.S. persons. The record is very substantial on this. So the government has a proper national security justification. And they added a little caveat in there, so to speak. I love throwing that in.
I need a little bell to ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, every once in a while.
Right.
That the analysis of this case is limited to the present circumstances, which might sound familiar because that's kind of what the Supreme Court said in Bush v. Gore back in the day. That, like, don't take too much precedential value from this. Don't use this in future cases because the circumstances here are very unique. And I think that's actually compelling because there's no other social media company that allegedly has this type of foreign malign influence that TikTok has. And the circumstances are unique and specific here because of the record that Congress has compiled, because of the investigatory work we've done, highlighting the Chinese government's influence campaign that they run through this parent company. So the law was upheld late last week. On Saturday, which was the 18th, a bunch of users started getting a message on their phone saying this application is no longer available in the United States. However, we are working with former president / president-to-be Donald Trump on a solution. So yay, go Trump. He's going to solve this problem for us. Donald Trump, if you'll recall from like 2019, 2020, was the first politician who tried to ban TikTok in the United States. And then he realized that TikTok was a really useful tool in promoting his candidacy. He also formed a friendship with the CEO of TikTok, who was at his inauguration, as well as just other people in the tech industry who were standing up for TikTok's interests. So he completely changed his opinion on this and said in statements over the weekend, like, don't worry, we're going to restore TikTok. As soon as I get into office, we'll figure it out. Biden, for his part, basically said, like, there's nothing I'm going to do. I can't really enforce this on the 19th. The enforcement mechanism is to levy fines against the companies that allow TikTok on their applications. But, like, just starting that process of going through fines is going to take more than the 24 hours that Joe Biden had in office. So It was basically like, I can't really do anything about this.
He kicked that can down the road to the next administration.
And he was happy to do it.
Sure.
And there was this really interesting political divide because you have national security hawks in both parties saying how necessary this is, how critical this law is to protect our national security. And then you have all of these young people, especially, say Gen Z, Gen Alpha, who couldn't give two you-know-whats about the national security implication. They see that their favorite application is being taken away, and they're freaking out. And people are recording, this is my final TikTok video. I can't believe their government is doing this to us. And Trump has great political instincts and sees all these young people who don't know anything about the influence campaign from the Chinese government being very upset about this. So he guarantees that he's going to get TikTok back online. So come late Sunday, the day before his inauguration, TikTok starts to reappear on people's phones, largely because President Trump was able to promise TikTok that they would receive this 90-day extension. As soon as he took office at noon on the 20th, he signed an executive order which extends the deadline for these 90 days to see if he can cobble together a U.S. buyer for this service. Contrary to the actual law itself, it doesn't seem that President Trump has identified any potential buyer. It's not clear to me that a sale is particularly close here. He's just using the authority given to the president under the act to extend this deadline for 90 days.
Let me just give you a quick correction there. His extension is 75 days. The one in the law is 90 days.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Always open to that correction.
And that's a point of contention we'll get to. Go on.
Yeah. No, that's actually really interesting. I hadn't realized that. So 75-day extension. And I don't know about you, Dave, but I think he's kind of biding his time and seeing if there's the political will to get Congress to repeal this provision or to at least revise it. One of the things that came up in the Supreme Court oral arguments and the oral arguments, frankly, at the D.C. Circuit was all these judges being like, why can't you just sell TikTok to a U.S. entity? What's the big deal here? Why is it so important for ByteDance to be the parent company? And what the attorneys for TikTok kept saying is, we can't do it. Like, ByteDance has built the algorithm. TikTok runs on the juice that ByteDance has built over the years, and it would just be completely impractical. So, I'm just throwing that out there as context. If there are people who are like, well, why can't we just have this, just find some U.S. company to make the purchase and the problem is entirely solved. Now, whether TikTok is completely on the level about that, I have no idea. And perhaps only they know. But that's where we are. So Trump has extended it, as you said, for 75 days. You can access TikTok on your device at the moment. And we'll see where it goes from here. I think, to me, just before we go forward, I think this is just like a fascinating political moment in that you have literally the establishment, which is members of both political parties who've done the research, who've been knee-deep in national security matters for decades, saying this is a huge danger. And then you have the masses of people who love this application, who love creating content, who use it as not just a communications tool, but to hawk their products. to go viral, being like, this is going to be the death of me if this application closes. And it seems to me that the influence campaign on the new president of the United States that was victorious was young people. And not the political establishment in Washington. And that, to me, is very interesting.
And you have a populist president who is very, as you say, has amazing instincts when it comes to sensing which way the wind is blowing.
And this is actually like a textbook example of his populism. I almost give him credit for it.
Yeah.
There are people in Washington who think they know better than the populace about this application and why it should be shut down and why it's a national security threat. And you have normal people in the millions across the country being like, we want this application. People even knowing that this is, maybe they don't know the full details, but that this is owned by ByteDance and the Chinese government is wielding this influence campaign. People still seem to want the application. And in fact, polling numbers started shifting against this ban once people started to realize that it was coming, because I think there's a backlash among the users of TikTok who are very influential. So it was just a really interesting view into how politics really works these days.
There's a really interesting unpacking of this over at Lawfare. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. One of the things they talk about is how both Apple and Google have removed TikTok from their app stores, and the infrastructure providers, the cloud providers, which are Oracle and Akamai, had terminated their services. So you couldn't download the app, and you couldn't use the app for that period of time over the past weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Apple and Google are still not allowing you to download the app, but Oracle and Akamai have decided to resume their services based on the word of President Trump. Now, the violations are $5,000 per user who accesses TikTok.
Yeah, that's really going to add up if they violate it.
Yeah. So what's the term of art that they used here? There's some of the senators who are trying to keep TikTok illegal are ruinous is the word they're using. That these fines are potentially ruinous because they could easily and quickly get into the trillions of dollars. When you're talking about $5,000 per user and you look at the size of the audience that TikTok has.
Right, and obviously that was Congress's intention in drafting the law in this manner. Right.
So they're also looking at the ability of the president to do what he's done here with the 75-day suspension, if that's even legal. Given that there was a legal framework in the bill for a 90-day extension, why didn't he use that? Well, this article contends that he didn't do that because he would have had to have cooperation from Congress to do that, who, as you pointed out, make the laws. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So I guess the technological upshot of this is that you can't, if you've never used TikTok before, you currently can't download it from an app store. Is that correct?
Yep.
But if it's already on your device, it's usable.
Right.
And presumably the people who are addicted to it are already have it on their device.
That's right.
Are already using it.
That's right.
Yeah. It's really interesting. One thing they note in that Lawfare article is that people who have relied on the non-enforcement of anything from an executive branch have fared poorly in court. Because oftentimes the executive branch will say, like, we're not going to enforce XYZ law as a statement of policy. They can justify it under what's called prosecutorial discretion when we're talking about criminal matters, being like, look, we only have so many prosecutors, and we're going to devote our resources to violent criminals and not to children who were brought here as immigrants.
Right.
So we're not going to enforce our immigration laws against those individuals. Obviously, that example is DACA. And in many circumstances, courts have held that people shouldn't rely on that type of executive pronouncement. It doesn't have that great of a force if there is litigation. So I think that's what Apple and Google are thinking right now. Like, these assurances are great, but it exposes us to too substantial risk to put this back in our app stores. And I think that's probably a wise decision, considering how drastic these penalties are. On the 75 days thing, I mean, I don't know. What do you think the justification for that is? Because I understand what you're saying about the Lawfare blog and not having to go through Congress, but what is that? What do we think that's intending to achieve?
I think it's just buying time. I think it allows him to do nothing, to let the app run, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't think it's any more complicated than that. We'll figure it out. We'll get together with people in Congress. We'll get everybody together and figure it out. And I don't think there's anything more complicated than that.
Yeah, and we'll just have to keep track of what happens through these next 75 days. I mean,
right.
I'm wondering if some members of Congress got cold feet seeing how freaked out their constituents got about this application being taken down. And I'm not sure that Congress properly considered the actual real-world impact of taking down this application. I think many members of Congress assumed a couple of things. One, they assumed that the threat of shutting down the application would inspire divestment. So TikTok would be purchased by some U.S. entity, and that would solve the problem. That didn't happen. Then they assumed that our court system would strike down the law, so they wouldn't be the ones responsible. And that didn't happen. The courts upheld the law. So now they realize that they were playing with live fire here.
Right.
Now, there are some members of Congress who believe deeply in this stuff, including many of President Trump's own allies. If you look at somebody like Senator Tom Cotton, who is an immigration restrictionist, who is just a very conservative lawmaker, very Trumpy, he is adamant about banning TikTok in the United States. And has made statements talking about its importance. So there are people like that in Congress who are never going to compromise on this, that they have this genuine belief that it is a national security threat, and that includes members of both parties. But I'm wondering if there are enough members who are like, I understand I understood the rationale behind this law when it passed, but do I want a bunch of young people yelling at me online?
Right. Well, but like you mentioned earlier, I mean, what a political moment to be in, where Congress did the work, right? They brought the evidence. And since then, I've seen some research someone else did about the type of information that TikTok puts in front of people or doesn't, that is beneficial or detrimental to China. And there was a compelling research that showed that the things that Congress are saying that TikTok does is true, that does happen, that there is bias there in terms of putting things in front of people that are complementary to the Chinese government and suppressing things that are not. But what an interesting thing that you bring all of this evidence to say, ladies and gentlemen, citizens of the United States, we are talking about a national security issue. And people are getting cold feet but people really like it, right?
I really want to go viral. And I can't do it on one of the other 100 applications that allow the same functionality.
Right. I mean,
it's fascinating. It's really fascinating.
It really is.
But it's like you could see this being taught in textbooks about democracy.
Right.
Like there are elites in every political system who think they know best and have done the research and know, what's good for you guys, what's good for the masses. And then there are the masses, and those two interests do not always align.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case here is people are being told we're trying to protect your national security, and people either don't care or don't believe it.
Yeah.
And Congress is going to have to contend with that reality.
Another sort of, tidbit that this Lawfare article points out is that there's a 5-year statute of limitations on this. So obviously, President Trump has 4 years, and so someone's going to follow him. And whoever that is, the actions taken by the tech companies today will not have exceeded their statute of limitations when President Trump is presumably no longer in office.
Yep.
So they're just in terms of the long-term potential liability here. Also, the article points out President Trump could change his mind, right? He's certainly ethereal in the things that he has certainly proven his ability to change his mind on things, along the way. And so that could absolutely happen here. So it's fascinating that Apple and Google have taken one point of view. They're playing it safe. They're taking the safe but unpopular position.
Right.
And the cloud providers, Oracle and Akamai, are taking the popular but, as we've said, potentially ruinous position to do what's popular. How interesting.
It is a really fascinating story. If I had to guess, I don't think he's going to change his mind about this because I think he's become invested in this issue because his biggest fans are very invested in this issue.
Right.
Including people who, it's worth noting, 2-3 years ago have tweets saying, ban TikTok. Like, we don't want the Chinese government influencing people in the United States. And now they're the ones being like, look what those people, look at what these elites in Washington are trying to do to your application.
Yeah.
So it is a fascinating issue, that's for sure.
Just real quick, just want to touch on the fact that moving on from TikTok, that one of the first things among the avalanche of executive orders that President Trump signed on day one, hour one, really, it was.
I assume you're going to talk about changing the Gulf of Mexico to Gulf of America?
That's a little outside of our lane, so we're not going to talk about that. But we are going to talk about how President Trump scrapped President Biden's AI safety executive order. So did away with that, which Republicans had said was detrimental to progress, to was a barrier to innovation was what they called it. So President Trump rolled that back. Interesting, here we are deep in everything having AI grafted onto it.
Right.
And under Biden's administration, trying to put some guardrails on that. And President Trump has removed those guardrails right away. Is there anything to really make of this, or do you think this is just par for the course of the new president coming in and doing a reverse on many of the previous president's executive orders?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I wouldn't read too much into it. He reversed 88 separate Biden administration executive orders on the first day that he took office.
Right.
So I think part of it is just the normal new president comes in who's ideologically opposed to the previous president, and you don't want a lot of the previous president's policies to remain in place. And I'm sure in President Trump's mind, vis-a-vis AI, he wants to start over and develop his own policy.
Yeah.
The one negative here is I think there was momentum, bipartisan momentum growing around guardrails on AI. And I think the Biden administration's executive order was a good start at the federal level.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to really solve this problem and to make it last more than one presidency is to pass some sort of piece of legislation that's signed into law, establishing these guardrails and statutes. I doubt that a very divided Congress is going to be able to do that, but maybe I'll be surprised. But I don't know what this says about his views on artificial intelligence, on how his administration is going to approach issues of artificial intelligence, rather than his view that Joe Biden was bad and let's comb through his executive orders, figure out the ones that are important and reverse them.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point that it wasn't like freeing AI was a major campaign promise of President Trump, right? I mean, he had other things that I guess this isn't going to bubble to the top of his list of his to-do list, I think, right away.
I don't think so either. This isn't an issue of passion for him. There is kind of a general warning, I think, from actually the Biden presidency about reversing previous executive orders without really thinking about it just because you didn't like the last president. For Joe Biden, I think something that brought down his presidency was executive orders that he issued in January 2021, reversing President Trump's immigration policies and particularly rules around asylum seekers. I have views about that as a policy, but from a political perspective, it ended up being disastrous for President Biden. There was a surge of asylum seekers, migrants at the border. It became a giant political problem for him. And by 2024, when it was probably too late to affect the election, he ended up enacting a policy via executive order that was as strict as Donald Trump's was before he left office the first time. And a lot of people were really perplexed in 2021 that he would have reversed that executive order. In my heart of hearts, I think his view was what Trump was doing on immigration was cruel. I want to do the opposite of that. So let's reverse every single thing that he did. And I think that instinct, no matter who the president is dangerous. So I don't know how that's going to play out as it relates to artificial intelligence, but just a word of caution there.
Yeah, interesting. All right, well, we will have links to the stories in our show notes. Your business needs AI solutions that are not only ambitious, but also practical and adaptable. That's where Domo's AI and data products platform comes in. With Domo, you can channel AI and data into innovative uses that deliver measurable impact. Secure AI agents connect, prepare, and automate your data workflows, helping you gain insights, receive alerts, and act with ease through guided apps tailored to your role. Data is hard. Domo is easy. Learn more at ai.domo.com. That's ai.domo.com. Ben, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Shiva Naughton. He's founder and CEO of Onimus, and we're talking about some of the challenges of data privacy.
For privacy, the way that I think about it from an analogy point of view is the food diabetic endemic or pandemic that's actually caught the nation. We create so much of food the same way that we create so much of data without even thinking about it. And then we consume and share the food and the data so much that all of us are making some corporations obese with data and honeypots of attacks. And that's the data privacy problem. We are not even thinking in terms of how much data we are creating of ourselves and how much data are we sharing of ourselves with people. That's the data privacy problem, nothing to do with security.
So in what ways does this become a specific challenge for organizations to deal with?
So 15, 20 years back, when social media started to come in, we were all thrilled to share our family photos and videos and what I ate for breakfast and everything else with the social media companies without thinking a second time in terms of how is this data going to be used by this free service. And now 15, 20 years later, we realized that these things are not just being used to target advertisements for me. In many cases, these are being used for bad and sometimes in really nefarious cases. So enterprises are just now getting warmed up to the problem that consumers have had for the last 15, 20 years. Our consumers have unwillingly gotten themselves into. Enterprises now, 5 years back, enterprises thought data is the new oil. I need to get data as much as possible about my customers and about my anyone that interacts with my systems and collected all this data. And only now we find out that the more data that an enterprise has, the more liable that they become, and they become more honeypots for cyber criminals and hackers to come and attack them.
You know, I think with as inexpensive as storage has become, there's a real impulse to just kind of be a pack rat when it comes to data. You know, we might as well hang on to this because who knows in the future we might need it. Do you understand folks coming at it from that point of view?
Yes, absolutely. So the 2010s created the cheap storage, and cheap storage essentially meant data retention policies kind of went out the window, and there was so much anticipation about using that data to unravel something great about a business insight that will fundamentally change the business, which it did. Amazon is a classic example. They used the data to target retail, and they did a really wonderful job when it came to that. And Google did the same. And every small enterprise and large enterprise started thinking, oh, maybe that one piece of data, if I kept it around, I can use that for my data mining and data analytics and get some insights that will fundamentally transform the business. And since storage is cheap, why delete it? Let me just keep holding data like anything, like there's no tomorrow. And that's what enterprises started doing.
And so where does that leave us today? Are folks still holding on to way more data than perhaps they should?
Yes, unfortunately, the momentum is still there that the systems that were set up in the 2010s and early 2020s to collect and store this data are still running fine, that they were collecting a lot more data than an enterprise needs. But only now we are opening up our eyes to the fact that, oh my God, this data is caustic for two reasons. So one reason is that if it gets hacked, if the data gets released, you are really liable because nation states have strong privacy laws now, and even individual states like California have strong privacy laws that if you somehow release this data unwillingly, you are liable for the damage that it causes your enterprise users. That's one part of the problem. The second part of the problem is essentially by storing all of this data, you're a honeypot. You're a honeypot that is actually attracting unwanted attention to your enterprise and bringing cyber criminals to attack it. And cyber criminals are no longer one guy or two guys sitting in a basement trying to attack the system, right? These are well-funded, thousands of employees employed, nation-state data centers and IT firms that are trying to do cyber criminal activity against one country to another country. So you become the target of unwanted adversarial countries' attention, essentially.
So how should a company come about getting a handle on this? I mean, what do you recommend in terms of having good policies in place?
So a lot of companies have something called a security posture. And I've been advocating that the companies need to start having a data posture. Data posture essentially means that think deliberately in terms of what data that you want to even collect for your business, and do not collect data that you do not need today. So that's step number one. Stop at the creation of data. And then the second thing is, if you collect the data, right during the time when you collect the data is when you have to say when the data should expire or how long am I going to retain the data. It's very tough to go back to a hard disk that you've had for 3-4 years and say, I want to delete it all, because you don't know what's in there, because you forgot what you collected and for what reason. So the best time to lay out data retention is during the data creation. So that's a step two. A lot of people think of life cycle and go, oh, I'll think about the data deletion towards the very end. That's fundamentally wrong thing. The fundamentally right thing is during data creation or even before data creation, thinking in terms of when am I going to delete the data, and only then create that data once you know what the expiry date of the data is going to be. And the third, fourth, fifth, and the nth step are all about how do you secure the data, how do you share the data, what are you going to use that data for, and so on and so forth. But the first two important steps are data creation and expiration of data, and have a good data posture around it.
How about dealing with individual users and all of the endpoints that are within an organization? I think it's natural for people to collect the things that they suspect they're going to need on their laptops, and these days probably more and more on their mobile devices. How do you come at that particular problem?
So this is where we have to take learning from what the defense agencies and CIA does. Need to know policy. They always talk about need to know. And in an enterprise, there's this thing about empowering employees and making employees do stuff that we want to be in a big one kumbaya family where we share data so that even the new hire knows every data that's out there to be able to look at it, use it for their own work and so on. So we have become one happy family sharing data in an enterprise. And that's supposed to be like a very happy, healthy company. But unfortunately, that's come to bite. We have seen individual employees leaking data inadvertently or willingly in some cases for nefarious reasons, right? So we have to take a data posture where we have to go back and then go back into really need to know policy, where when an employee wants to really get a data for their work, they have to fundamentally justify why they need that particular data. And data has to be thought of as important, and data is important, and they need to be kept away from people that don't really need the data. So that is a fundamentally phenomenal change, especially Silicon Valley companies where CEOs like myself pride in keeping transparency and sharing every information about the company, every data about the company, giving free access to the data within the company to everyone. The sales team would have access to the engineering stuff. The engineering team will have access to the sales stuff, because we say that everyone is an employee owner, everyone has equity, and everyone needs to know the entire business. All that is true, except when it comes to the fundamental granular data. You can share everything about the company without having to share the credit card number of your customer widely with the entire organization. You can share things in engineering to the sales team and the marketing team without having to share the actual source code and the code base. So you have to have, like I said, we have to have a data posture and then decide need to know basis what data goes to who.
I mean, it really strikes me that a big part of this is communications as well, to be able to explain to everyone why these policies are in place and the effect they can have on the health and survival of the company.
Absolutely. See, 15, 20 years back, hoarding information gave people power. The manager would know some information that the employees would know, and that gave the manager the power in the organization. And then the level above would know some information that the levels below did not have. In some case, those barriers getting broken were good, that it became a more egalitarian company. There was not like a pyramidal hierarchical structure in the organization. And people said, oh, we empower our employees that everyone knows everything that the CEO knows, almost everything that the CEO knows. And you can use that data to do fundamental things. And innovation really came through with all of that. But getting back to saying that you can still have this and that is a paradigm that we have to go to. And we have to communicate that transparency does not mean profuse data sharing. Yeah, you can be transparent about the customers you have, about what the customers have bought and stuff. But you don't, like I said, the extreme case is that not everyone in the organization needs to know the customer's financial account information. So that's where we have to be very cognizant in communicating transparently in this particular case, saying why certain data is kept away from certain sections of within the company, not because it's about going back to the 15, 20-year-old story of hoarding information for power. It's not about that. It's exactly about need to know basis. What is a need for an employee in one department to know the data of another department's data, not creating silos of departments, but really understanding the needs for their day-to-day work function and then use it. And if the employee is able to prove, for example, if a marketing employee is able to say why he or she needs a certain sales data or a certain engineering data, vet it and then provide access. Make that easily doable, but don't do it as a default.
All right. Well, I think I have everything I need for our story here. Is there anything I missed, anything I haven't asked you that you think it's important to share?
Our fundamental tenet about SaaS, Dave. So 20 years back, software as a service companies came about. And we fundamentally believe that was implemented wrongly. And let me quickly explain. Software as a service was when an enterprise could not or did not want to create all the pieces of the application themselves, that they thought, you know what, I can go to this vendor that does login really well, or I can go to this vendor that does payments really well and obtain the service from them. That transaction was going to be just about, I give money and I get a service back from them. It was supposed to be a single, I give money, I get a service. But essentially what happened was, the way that SaaS got implemented, not only did enterprises give money, they also gave data to get the service back. That was a fundamentally wrong handshake that happened, giving data and dollars to get a service back from SaaS. And essentially what that did was every enterprise data is spread across so many different SaaS vendors. Statista had a report that said there were like 120 SaaS vendors on an average that a large enterprise uses across their entire company, right? So an enterprise actually has their data spread across 120 SaaS vendors. Take, for example, you have an application that uses a login from an auth provider. The login auth provider gets your customers' username and email addresses and stuff. The same enterprise uses a payment provider. That payment provider now gets your customers' your email address, financial information, and data. Your data is basically your customers' data for an enterprise is being strewn around to all of these different SaaS providers. That fundamentally is wrong. And that had to be swiveled on its head, where it is only about giving dollars and getting a service back and not dollars and data.
All right, interesting conversation. And again, our thanks to Shiva Nathan, founder and CEO of Onimus, for taking the time for us. We do appreciate it. Cyber threats are evolving every second, and staying ahead is more than just a challenge, it's a necessity. That's why we're thrilled to partner with ThreatLocker, the cybersecurity solution trusted by businesses worldwide. ThreatLocker is a full suite of solutions designed to give you total control, stopping unauthorized applications, securing sensitive data, and ensuring your organization runs smoothly and securely. Visit threatlocker.com today to see how a default deny approach can keep your company safe and compliant. And that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to caveat@n2k.com. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Our executive editor is Brandon Karp. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.